The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss, is recognized for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. Mr. Horowitz, I know there's probably limited conversation you can have on this regarding the FISA report, and I'm not going to try to go too deeply, but just some questions for understanding. I know this is something the President wants as much as possible to be known to the public, and I think the American people deserve to know how all this debacle began. But I also know that a lot of it was classified. Can you just generally say percentage-wise about how much of that report is classified?
I'm not going to get into percentages of reports at this point. I'll just say, as we wrote to our oversight committees, including this committee and Ranking Member Jordan, we've provided a draft of our report for classification marking purposes. So what the percentages precisely will depend on what the Attorney General and the Department and the FBI decide after they evaluate it. And that's the process it's in right now.
Okay. Are you working with the Department of Justice to have some of that declassified?
Right now, what we've done is meet with the folks at the Justice Department and the FBI to tell them what we've done so far. They have the draft of the factual information that we've developed. We've talked through the classification issues with them, but it's ultimately up to them to decide what's going to be marked and how it's going to be marked, or how it's not going to be marked. That's normal process. That's how it would occur. We may weigh in once we see it back as to what our views are.
Okay.
As to any disagreements.
So there could be a point that you would weigh in.
That's correct.
Okay.
That is usual process. These rarely go in a one straight line process.
Okay, gotcha. Regarding Attorney John Durham, are y'all in any discussions about what he's finding and what you have found?
I'm going to defer to him and the Attorney General on that issue as to what they're doing. I have had communications with him, but it's really they're a separate entity that he's working under the direction of the Attorney General. I'm obviously independent.
Do you know if he has found any of the same concerns that you were concerned about?
You'd have to ask him on what he's found. I'm not in a position to speak for him.
Okay. Well, let's go over to the Comey report that did come out, if we can. You had mentioned that, obviously he failed in some of his responsibilities to protect some sensitive information, and you referred to his actions at one point as a dangerous example. Can you elaborate a little bit of what you meant by that term, that he set a dangerous example?
Yeah, we were particularly focused on the providing of information in the memo that was really a recording of his meeting, investigative meeting, to a journalist to put in a newspaper. That was not classified information. That particular memo didn't have classified information. Our concern there, and why we referred to it that way, is we have instances in my office. I've had this example as a federal prosecutor in corruption cases previously, where the law enforcement agents you're working with or who have worked on a matter may think a decision was not made for the right reasons. And our concern was empowering FBI directors, or frankly any FBI employee or other law enforcement official, with the authority to decide that they're not going to follow established norms and procedures because, in their view, they've made a judgment that the individuals they're dealing with can't be trusted.
So the fact that he was in the highest position of the FBI would add to your level of concern.
Correct.
Now you actually referred criminal prosecution to the Department of Justice for Comey, correct?
We're required by the IG Act to send information that we've identified that could plausibly be criminal to the department, and
That's pretty monumental. Do you know of any FBI director who in the past has ever had a criminal prosecution?
I wouldn't know as I sit here today.
Or any other head of any federal agency?
I do, actually, so
okay.
but I'll keep that.
All right, and the same type referral applied to
Same issue.
McCabe as well.
Right.
Is that correct?
The IG Act requires me to expeditiously report to the Attorney General when I see evidence that could be considered criminal, and we follow the law.
Okay, thank you very much.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, is recognized for his 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Inspector General Horowitz, the committee's investigating efforts by the Department of Education to interfere with the integrity of its Inspector General office and its operations. On December 17th last year, Education Committee Chairman Bobby Scott requested that the IG examine at the Department of Education, examine the department's decision to restore recognition of the accreditor for several failed for-profit universities. And the Education Department was apparently unhappy with the IG's subsequent decision to conduct this investigation. The leadership was apparently so perturbed and threatened by the IG investigation that they tried to shut it down. On January 3rd of 2019, Deputy Secretary of Education Mitchell Zeiss wrote a letter to the acting Inspector General Sandra Bruce asking her to drop the investigation, and if she refused, demanding that she change its scope by having it take a deeper historical dive into the Obama administration. When Ms. Bruce responded to the department's request, naturally by asserting her institutional independence as the Inspector General, the Deputy Secretary ordered her to step down from the position. The department apparently planned to replace her as an independent IG with an agency insider, the Deputy General Counsel currently at the department. Were these actions by the Department of Education appropriate?
No, I was very concerned about it when I heard about it from acting IG Bruce, and I worked with her to address the issue, and which successfully occurred.
Have we seen similar kinds of assaults on the independence and integrity of inspector generals in other departments?
Frankly, over time, there have been. As I mentioned in my opening, it's a perpetual challenge for us. Agencies aren't always enamored with our oversight efforts.
Was there anything wrong with, or is there anything wrong with committees in Congress or members of Congress writing to inspectors generals, urging them to investigate this or that alleged misconduct?
Not at all. I get those pretty frequently.
After this committee urged the White House to reverse course in firing Ms. Bruce, the department reinstated her as the acting inspector general, but the department is refusing to make individuals available for interviews about how and why the decision was made to fire her in the first place. Ms. Bruce has been serving as acting IG for over 9 months. President Trump has still not appointed an individual to fill this position on a permanent basis. Mr. Horowitz, when you testified before this committee last November, there were 14 vacant IG positions, and 12 of those were presidentially appointed Senate-confirmed positions. As you stated in your testimony, there are still 12 vacancies. Why is this a problem for the government?
Frankly, and again, this has been a perpetual challenge for us, IGs are not a priority, or don't seem to be a priority, I should say, when considering vacancies in the government. And that's true, frankly, when nominations, in terms of nominating people, and also, frankly, getting them confirmed promptly.
And what is the impact of all of these vacancies on public policy?
It's a significant problem. Acting IGs, like acting IG Bruce, do an outstanding job. There was a 15-month vacancy at the DOJ between Mr. Fine leaving and me getting the position. And the acting IG, who was the deputy, did a fine job, but you don't have the ability to push back when that independence issue comes up in quite the same way. I'm Senate confirmed. Ms. Bruce's predecessor was Senate confirmed. There's a certain authority that comes with that when you come before Congress and when you deal with Congress and when you deal with your leadership, because they know you're there. They know they can't remove you. It has to be, and it can only be the president. The Attorney General has no authority of me. The Secretary of Education had no authority over Ms. Bruce's predecessor. That's a big difference.
The president hasn't even nominated a candidate for 9 of these positions, including the Departments of Education, Defense, Treasury, HHS, and the EPA. The Department of Defense, with a budget of more than $700 billion, has not had a permanent IG since January of 2016. What can be done to put this on the radar?
Well, one of the things that was done is last week, on the Senate side, the Homeland Security Committee there, which handles IG nominations, wrote a bipartisan letter of the entire committee. I think it was the entire committee. It was a bipartisan letter to the president saying you need to nominate people, and we in the Senate need to do a better job moving those nominations. Both of those problems have existed, and they've been existing, frankly, for many years. It's been something in 4 years as chair of this committee, as chair of SIGI. I've talked about with presidential personnel in the prior administration, in this administration. We just got an Interior IG confirmed finally after almost 8 years of vacancies.
Well, I agree with your sense of urgency about the importance of this issue, and I think we stand ready in this committee to help however.
I thank the gentleman, and I certainly agree we need to move these confirmations in the Senate. In fact, maybe if we spent more time confirming IGs instead of federal judges, we'd all be better off.
If the gentleman would.
Of course.
Perhaps since it's independent, maybe we work on a bipartisan piece of legislation to make it where it's not Senate confirmed. I mean, actually, those appointments, if we could truly make it where it's not Senate confirmed, move it through where you have the IG committee. Let's at least see if we can work on it.
Fair enough. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stubbe, is recognized for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Horowitz, I'm going to kind of pick up where Mr. Heiss left off. He was asking you about the fact that Comey had been referred criminally by your report, and that's correct?
That's correct.
You also referred Andy McCabe for federal prosecution. Is that correct?
We made the same referral pursuant to the IG Act as with Mr. Comey, as we do whenever that provision applies.
And that's a criminal referral?
That's as the IG Act requires us to do, yes.
And so was McCabe the acting director when you referred him?
I'm not going to get into the precise timing, actually, of it. But the answer would be no, because, actually, I can say that by the time the issue came to be, it was after August 1st, which is, I think, the August 1st of 2017, which is, I think, the date of Director Ray's installation.
Okay, and why did you refer him for criminal prosecution, McCabe? Why was he referred?
We made as the public report, I'll stick to what's public, the public report, we found a lack of candor, which means we didn't find that he provided us truthful information, and when we made a determination under Section 4 of the IG Act that we thought that it occurred, we were required by the law to report it expeditiously to the Attorney General.
So, in other words, he lied. I mean, you say lack of candor.
We make a lack of candor finding. I'm going to defer to the prosecutors. In a report last year, we criticized the FBI director for usurping the authority of the Attorney General to make prosecutorial decisions. I'm not going to do that today.
Okay. And you also found that McCabe failed to safeguard FBI information. Is that correct?
Well, what we found was, just to be clear, that he had provided information to, or authorized an employee to provide information to a reporter that was FBI information.
So we have two heads of the FBI, one director, one acting director, we think close around to the timeline, both referred for criminal prosecution. Is that, I'm saying that
Pursuant
correct?
to the IG Act, we made referrals in both instances.
So I want to point out how profound that is for those sitting at home and for the American people, that we have two back-to-back heads of the FBI, both referred for criminal prosecution. Both of these heads of the FBI failed to safeguard sensitive FBI information. Is that correct?
In both instances, they disclosed to reporters information that was protected FBI information, sensitive law enforcement.
And I want to move quickly to the latest report on Comey, and I'm going to just read from page 52. In this analysis section, we address whether Comey's actions violated department and FBI policies or the terms of Comey's FBI employment agreement. We determined that several of his actions did. We conclude that the memos were official FBI records rather than Comey's personal documents. Accordingly, after his removal as director, Comey violated applicable policies and his employment agreement by failing to either surrender his copies of memos 2, 4, 6, and 7 to the FBI or seek authorization to retain them. by releasing official FBI information records to third parties without authorization, and by failing to immediately alert the FBI about his disclosures to his personal attorneys once he became aware on June 27th that Memo 2 contained words that were classified at the confidential level. Did I read that accurately?
I don't have it in front of me, but it certainly sounds like that's accurate.
You've previously faulted the FBI director in your report of last year. In your report on Comey's memos, you wrote, "We have previously faulted Comey for acting unilaterally and inconsistent with department policy." That was the Clinton email IG report.
Correct.
In your report on the FBI's investigation of the Clinton emails, you wrote, and quote, "We found that it was extraordinary and insubordinate for Comey to conceal his intentions from his superiors, the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General, for the admitted purpose of preventing them from telling him not to make the statement and to instruct his subordinates in the FBI to do the same." Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't have the language in front of me, but
It's
I certainly recall that general language.
It's Clinton email IG report, page 241. You use the words extraordinary and insubordinate. You're not exactly someone who would make such bold characterizations. In that case, you found his misconduct merited these conclusions?
Yes.
You found Comey's conduct this year just as troubling, correct?
We found it troubling. I'm not going to make a relative judgment as to which was
Well,
more
you wrote,
troubling.
and I quote, "Comey's unauthorized disclosure of sensitive law enforcement information about the Flynn investigation merits similar criticism." Page 61, Comey memo report.
Correct. Merits similar criticism. Agreed.
I want to thank you for your time here today, and I just think it's beholden on the American people that they get to read this information and it becomes public.
I thank the gentleman, and perfect timing. Congratulations.
I tried to wrap it up there.
You
right
did
at
it
the end.
perfectly. Mr. Jordan, did you wish to be recognized?
Unless the ranking member wanted to go.
He's deferring to you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Horowitz, let me pick up right where the gentleman from Florida was. And I appreciate the letter you sent to Chairman and Ranking Member last Friday on the upcoming FISA report that is now with the Attorney General. But let me go first to what Mr. Stubbe just talked about. Have you been asked to testify by Chairman Cummings or Chairman Nadler about the Comey IG report you released 3 weeks ago?
No, I'm not.
Have you been approached at all by the chairman of those respective committees?
Personally, I've not. I can check with anybody else in my organization, but I'm not aware of any.
They've been asked you about it?
Oh, I'm sure they've asked about it.
But
I'm sorry,
ask
talking
about
scheduling
you
hearing.
testifying and answering questions about that specific report.
About a hearing, I don't
No
believe
hearing.
there have been discussions.
Have you had any discussions with Chairman Cummings or Chairman Nadler about the upcoming FISA report, particularly subsequent to this letter, or even before this letter, about the FISA report when you might testify in front of either committee?
We haven't had, to my knowledge, discussions about testimony or a hearing.
But
We've had
you would-
discussions generally about the report and timing, but not about.
I think in your letter you point out you talked to over 100 interviews, over 1 million records your team examined. You spent a lot of time on this report. This is pretty significant. You would anticipate testifying in front of both the House Oversight Committee, which has jurisdiction over the Inspector Generals, and the House Judiciary Committee. Is that right?
I guess I would say as to any of my reports, I always am available and willing to testify. I'm not sure I'd want to advocate for being in 4 hearings, 2 here and 2 on the Senate side. So,
well, we combined them last year, a year and a half ago.
Yes.
On one. We did that. So all I know is I think, as Mr. Stubbe said, this is important information, and frankly, the American people would like to see it. Let me go, if I could, to the recent IG report about Mr. Comey's leaked memos, and I want to read from it. I'm talking about on page 17 of your report, January 7th, 2017, memo number 1. And you say Comey's first one-on-one meeting with President Trump occurred on January 6, 2017. Is that right?
that's right.
And before briefing I'm reading from your report, before briefing President-elect Trump, Mr. Comey met with senior leaders at the FBI, Jim Rubicki, Andy McCabe, Jim Baker, and supervisors of the FBI's investigation. Is that right?
Again, I don't have it in front of me, but that's my
Yeah, so he has a
recollection.
pre-meeting. They're going to go up to brief President-elect Trump,
Right.
January 6, 2017, so it's President-elect Trump at the time. They have a pre-meeting to figure out how this is going to go. And actually, even more of a pre-meeting they have with Mr. Clapper and Mr. Brennan to figure out how exactly the briefing for the president-elect is going to happen. Is that right?
And who's going to do it.
And who's going to do what? Right. And they break it into two parts. All of them brief the president-elect on general assessment, intelligence assessment, the ICA, and then they all leave and Mr. Comey sits down with the president. Is that right?
That's my recollection, yes.
So Mr. Comey sits down with President-elect Trump and talks to him about what?
Again, I don't have the report in front of me, but my recollection is what we were told is it's about what has come to be known as the salacious and unverified reporting about certain events in Moscow.
Witnesses interviewed by the OIG also said they discussed Trump's potential responses to being told about the salacious information in the dossier, including that President Trump might make statements about or provide information of value to a pending Russia interference investigation. Is that right?
That's my recollection.
Yeah, so Comey stuck around and briefed him on the dossier.
Well, on that one piece is my recollection.
Understand. So what I'm interested in is we always thought that this meeting was to give the president the intelligence assessment and fill him and give him a briefing. He's president-elect. But it now looks like, based on what you wrote at the bottom of page 17, that they included trying to get information on the pending Russia interference. So it wasn't just information going one way. They were actually trying to get information from the president as well. Is that right?
That's what we've reported.
That's different. That's different. That's something I don't think we knew before. Multiple FBI witnesses recalled agreeing ahead of time that Comey should memorialize this event after it happens, right?
Right.
So he gets in the car on the way home, and he immediately starts memorializing what took place. It's interesting. One of the things that he said, the reason they did this was because they thought the president-elect might misrepresent what happened in the encounter. Remember that from the report?
Vaguely.
Yeah.
Again, I'd have to.
It says it on page 18. I think that's amazing to me because the irony was the only one misrepresenting anything, it seems to me, was Mr. Comey, because all the while he's trying to get information from the president about the pending investigation, he's been telling the president he's not even under investigation.
I thank the gentleman. If Mr. Horowitz, you want to respond?
No, I have nothing further to say. I would stand by our report.
Could I ask one question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Horowitz, was President Trump under investigation at the time that this all happened on January 6th?
I don't know that I'm in a position to say one way or another. I've read what the memos say and what Mr. Comey in the memos reported he represented to the president that the president was not, or the president-elect at the time.
He'd in fact been told by the very guy who had to memorialize this conversation, was trying to get information from the president, that he wasn't in fact under investigation by that very individual.
And all I can speak to is what is in the memos,
said,
what was said. I don't know independently what was going on in the investigation.
Thank you.
At that time.
I thank the gentleman. The distinguished ranking member is recognized for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Horowitz, I'm going to follow up a little bit on where Mr. Jordan just said, but before I do that, I want to say this. The chairman and I were talking about, we appreciate your professionalism. The fact that he can't influence you and the fact that I can't influence you may frustrate both of us, but we both appreciate the fact that we can't actually affect your independence. And here's, if your IG community at DOJ shared information with the media the way that you found in your inspections, would that undermine your overall objective in terms of sharing information with the media?
If anyone on my staff
Yes.
did that, there would be serious consequences because it would have a significant effect on our work.
And so wouldn't you draw the same conclusion that sharing information under ongoing investigations within the DOJ and FBI is not a practice that we should actually embrace?
Absolutely.
Did you find that in some of your Inspector General's report on what has already been published with relationship to Director James Comey?
We did.
Multiple times?
Well, we have in that report the one instance where it occurred through Mr. Richmond to the press.
All right. Do you, once you have a report that is out, and once we've read the report, do you go back and look at congressional testimony to correlate between what you were told under oath by witnesses versus testimony that has been given to Congress to make sure that those two come together?
If we're aware of it and it relates directly to it, yes, but obviously we're not up to date on all the different testimonies that occurred. So usually we rely on the referrals.
Right, and so that's where I'm kind of going to this, because we've taken now your report and we've put it side by side, congressional testimony that James Comey made before the Joint Oversight and Judiciary hearing, and I'm finding just a number of irregularities. So would it be appropriate if Ranking Member Jordan and I were to refer those inconsistencies to the IG, and if we did that, would the IG look at those inconsistencies?
It's certainly appropriate for us to get a referral about a then employee of the department, which is, I think, the hearing you're probably referencing, and then we would assess it, and as you indicated before, we would make an independent assessment of whether it's appropriate for us.
Well, I'll give you one example. Mr. Gowdy was asking, it said, did you initiate an obstruction of justice investigation based on what the president said? It was a very clear question. Mr. Comey said, I don't think so. I don't recall doing that, so I don't think so. However, on page 13 of your IG's report, it said that Comey purposely leaked the memos so that they could have a special counsel appointed to investigate obstruction of justice. So two of those cannot be true. They're at opposite dynamics in terms of what they're constructing, and we have dozens of examples where that has happened. Is that something that would be important for the American people to know and for you to look into?
I guess I would say, as in any situation, we'd want to get the referral, the testimony, and so we could make.
So we'll be referring those inconsistencies to you today, Mr. Horowitz, and I think that it's important that the American people get to look at this. My understanding is from reports that, and from your letter, that you have officially given the FISA abuse work that you've done over to be reviewed by the appropriate parties at DOJ. Is that correct?
So we've given our factual findings to the department for their marking. What we then do once we get it back, whether we have to go back and forth on the markings is one issue.
Right.
Once those are final, we then take that and try and write our public report from that.
Right.
Because we want to make as much of this public. Sometimes we'll have to either redact information or write around it, but that would be the next stage after this. So we're not quite final yet.
Right. So at this point, can you rule out the fact that there will be any criminal referrals as it relates to this new FISA abuse report that is coming out? Can you rule that out?
I'm not going to speak to that issue one way or the other.
All right. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Yeah, for Mr. Horowitz. I want to direct your attention to conclusions involving Comey failing to safeguard the FBI's Flynn investigation, which was going on at the time. You wrote Comey's closest senior FBI advisors were shocked when they learned the former FBI director instructed the release of his memo containing information about the ongoing FBI investigation, right?
That's correct.
What specifically did they say to your office?
I don't have the report in front of me, but I remember them saying words like shock, surprise, those kinds of words when they learned that he had released the information through Mr. Richmond to a reporter.
And they were unsolicited reactions?
Yes, they were during testimony under oath that were recorded.
Why do you think they were shocked or stunned?
Well, it was completely inconsistent, as we wrote in the report, with department policy and how we expect, and I think they expect, FBI employees to handle law enforcement information.
Okay, one advisor used the term disappointed to describe Comey's misconduct. Can you explain why they'd be disappointed in the FBI director?
Well, I'm not going to speak to what was in their mind when they said the words, but I can say again, I think there's a general understanding in the department and within the FBI that when you have law enforcement information, you don't disclose it to the press when there's an ongoing criminal investigation, which there was at the time.
Okay. Comey discussed or showed contents of the memos with people outside the FBI, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Then Acting DA Administrator Chuck Rosenberg saw a Comey memo, right?
I don't have the report in front of me. I think that's correct. I think they either talked about it or he showed it to him.
Okay. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I right now have a vote in another committee, so I'm going to yield the rest of my time to Congressman Jordan.
I thank the gentleman for yielding.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Horowitz, I'm going to go back to page 17, where we were a few minutes ago. Before briefing President-elect Trump, Comey met with senior leaders of the FBI, including Chief of Staff Jim Rubicki, then FBI Deputy Director Andy McCabe, then FBI General Counsel Jim Baker, and the supervisors of the FBI's investigation of the Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. So he meets with his key players, key team, people heading the investigation, and the top people at the FBI. Goes up to Trump Tower, has the meeting, his one-on-one meeting with the president where he briefs him on the dossier. That meeting is done. He immediately comes back out and starts recording what took place, memorializing the conversation with the president-elect. Right?
That's correct.
Multiple FBI witnesses recalled agreeing ahead of time that Comey should memorialize this meeting. So the same people that he met with in the pre-meeting said, hey, when you go talk with the president-elect, as soon as you come out, we're going to have a secure laptop, you write it all down.
Right.
And you need to write it all down because we think the president-elect might misrepresent something later on, right?
If I recall correctly, that was one of the reasons.
One of the reasons, all right? Even though the very guy who's in there giving the briefing is misrepresenting a fundamental fact to the President of the United States, telling him he's not under investigation when they're actually trying to set the President up, in my opinion, get information from the President. So he goes back out, he memorializes this, and then you say in the next paragraph down, he memorialized Memo 1, and he had it that way until he arrived at FBI's New York field office, where Comey gave a quick download of his conversation with the very same people who he had the pre-meeting with, Mr. Rubicki, Mr. McCabe, Mr. Baker, and supervisors of the FBI crossfire hurricane investigation. Is that all accurate?
That's my recollection.
Okay, so you used three names twice, Rubicki, McCabe, and Baker, and then you, instead of saying other names, you say supervisors. Are those supervisors the people who I suspect they are, the people who ran the crossfire hurricane? Are those supervisors Peter Strzok and Lisa Page?
I don't recall as I sit here. I'd have to go back and look at it. And if we can, with all of these issues, we have to look at the Privacy Act and other laws to see what we can do. But I'll go back and check. I'm not sure that is the case, so let me go back and check.
Could it be a bigger number than those two? If it's not those two, it could be other two.
Or it could be others.
It could be others as well, or it could be
yes.
those two plus others.
I don't know as I sit here who were those individuals.
Is it likely that Peter Strzok is one in knowing that he was the guy who led the crossfire hurricane investigation?
I actually have no idea if that's likely or not because I'm not sure that's entirely accurate, that your reference to what his role was at various times.
Okay.
I thank the gentleman. Thank you.
Thank
for
you,
your response.
and Mr.
Thank you,
Horowitz.
Mr. Jordan.